Hey everybody, so in this video, what we're going to be making is a turn-based battle system game. It's something that I've been wanting to do for a really long time, I just haven't been able to get around to it. Kind of like a year or so I've been trying to make this video, I just haven't been able to. So, going to be doing that now. Now, the only thing I will say is that it is probably going to be more of an advanced level tutorial, so I do have tons of beginner level content on this channel, so go ahead and check that out. Also, there is a video titled something along the lines of how I set up all of my React projects. You're going to want to watch that if you're not familiar with how to set up React projects in general. So now I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate what it is we'll be building in this video. Okay, so I have it up running here. As you can see, we basically have one view here with a start game button in the middle. If I click that, it opens up the battle system game, and you can basically choose either to attack, do some magic, or heal yourself. Now, the left is my character, on the right, it is the opponent's character. And when I do an attack, magic, or heal, you will see an animation for the character happen, along with the damage animation or the healing animation, etc. So keeping that in mind, if I just do an attack, you can see there's an announcer that's typing out the text here as it goes. You can see that the health bar has depleted. You can see that there's animations involved. So I'm just going to go all the way through and get to the point where one of us wins. So as you can see, this isn't really the best AI. That's not really going to be the focus of this tutorial, but I would love to somehow come back and make a more advanced AI for this. That's really not my area of expertise. I think one more attack should do it. Yep, that is the end. So once one of the characters wins, you can see the name displayed there, and then you can choose to play again. And that is what we're going to be building. So if this looks interesting to you, go ahead and stick around because we're going to code all the way through it. But first, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already. Let's go. So what I'm doing here is just setting up an empty React project using Create React App. Again, I have a video, which I'm going to leave a link in the description for it, that goes over how I set up all of my React projects. If you're not familiar with how React projects are set up or how I'm going to be kind of doing it in this video, just go watch that and it's pretty quick. You'll familiarize yourself with how to do that and we can move forward. Okay, so I have my project set up the way that I like to do mine. I'm going to assume that if you don't know how this is set up, you've at least gone and watched that video so you can have an understanding. Okay, so I have my JS config, I have my prettier set up. Now I want you to go to the GitHub link for this code in the description and go to the assets and download the assets from the GitHub repository. Put it inside of an assets folder in your public folder. You're going to need that. Also, I made a few small changes. You don't have to really do this. I changed the short name and the name and all of that good stuff inside of the manifest file. And inside of the index.html file, I also changed the title here. So these are the things you don't really have to do, but just showing you that I went in and did that. So let's take a look at what's inside of the entry point component here, which in my case is this app.js file. So I have this, this div that's rendering out the word app. I've got my styles set up here, but it's empty. I don't have any actual styles in there. We'll add that shortly. But I want to just run the project really quick and see what's on the screen. So I'm going to just simply run npm start, let this thing boot up really quick. I always like to do this just to make sure that the project is running and that there are no syntax errors or anything like that that I just missed when setting up my project. So I'm going to inspect here, go to the console. I've got this mobile thing set up. Let's see, so I see app. I don't think I see any errors in the console or any warnings, so should be set up and ready to go. I'm gonna jump into here and start by kind of thinking about how I wanna structure this application. So I know there's gonna be a total of 3 views, right? There's 3 views. There's the start screen with the button that says start game, there's the battle mode, and then there is the end screen. So a total of 3 views. Each of those views will be encapsulated into their own components, but this app component is going to serve as like the higher order component that switches between those. I'm not going to use something like React Router for this. It's totally unnecessary. Instead, I'm just going to keep a piece of state that basically is called mode, and it's going to be in one of 3 states, either something like start, battle, or game over. And depending on what the value of that state is, it's going to render one of those 3 components. So let's start there. So I'm just gonna, right now I'm just returning a single line. I'm gonna add my curly braces and then my return statement so that I can actually put some logic in here. And I wanna create a piece of state that I'm just gonna call mode. Okay, so I got my import here at the top for that. Now there's going to be 3 modes. There is going to be battle, start, and game over. And let's initialize it as start because when we first start up the app, we're going to want to be in the start mode state. So I think we'll have 3 checks here. The first one is going to check whether or not the mode is equal to start. So if mode is equal to start, which it will be at first, then we want to render a component for the start menu. And I'm just going to put start menu here. I'm going to copy this for the other 2 scenarios as well. So we have start, battle, and game over. So this will say battle mode, and this will be game over. But we want to make sure to do the check here. So game over, and we'll do camel casing for that. Cool. So what we want to do is save this and see if what we see on the screen is the word start menu. And I do in fact see start menu right here. So far so good. But instead of just rendering the string start menu, I'm going to obviously want to render a start menu component. So I'm going to quickly create a new folder with a component similar to the app component structure here, a new folder called, I guess, start menu with a component and all of that inside of it. So I'm going to do that really quick. So over here on the left, if you look inside of the components folder, I've created a new folder called start menu. And in here I have my index.js, which exports that, the component, which just has some boilerplate stuff. And it says start menu component, and then a styles file with no styles in there yet. So now instead of rendering this, I want to render that component out. But I'm going to add that to my index.js inside of my components folder. So I'm exporting app here. Below, I should also export start menu, and I'm going to do that for every single component that we create in here. Again, if this is unfamiliar to you, you really should watch that video on how I set up all of my React projects, which is in the description below. But anyway, moving forward. So now I want to go ahead and render that component out. So we're going to call it start menu. Actually, we already called it start menu, but I'm going to load that, and let's take a look at what's on the screen. We see the word start menu component. So we know that this is working good. Now we need a way to get from the start menu to the next mode. So inside of the start menu, you know that we're going to render a button called start game. But since this app component is what is handling the state and the switching logic for these 3 components, we're going to want to pass in a function that updates that set mode to battle whenever that button is clicked inside of here. So we're going to create a prop called onStartClick, and it's just going to be a function that sets the state, so set mode to battle. So it's just going to set mode to battle, but this start menu component does not currently have this. So I'm going to jump into that component and create the button along with the, the callback. So we're going to have the div with the class of main, but I'm going to get rid of the text here and throw in a button component, or a button element, I should say. And the text for it will just say start game, but we want to add a couple things. We want to add a class name. So I'm going to add a class name, and I'll call it styles.start button. And we also want to add an on click for this, right? We want to add an on click. And when this is clicked, we want to call that prop function that we are passing in, this on start click function. So we need to be able to accept that. So in here, I'm going to destructure that on start click. And then here, we're just simply going to call on start click whenever this button is called. So just looking at this, it looks like this should be pretty much all of the logic we need in order to get to the next step. And as you can see, when mode is equal to battle, we're just going to render out the text battle mode for now. So if I go back to the browser, which I will in a second, we should see a button. I should be able to click that, and then it should switch to the text battle mode. Let's see what happens. So on initial render, we see start game. If I click it, now we see battle mode. So now we have that ability to switch between modes. And I think now would be a pretty good time to go ahead and add in some styles. So we can pretty much style up the start menu, but there's also going to be like a background with a gradient and that sort of thing. So I'm going to copy in some styles into the app folder style.module.css for the main class. You can copy the same styles in. You can either type it in yourself, or you can go to the GitHub link in the description, go to the file in the GitHub repository and copy them in yourself. But I'm going to quickly paste these in. So I just pasted in these styles here, and then I'm going to head over to the start menu styles file, and I'm going to add these styles right here. So I have main styles, and I also have styles for the start button. Again, you can copy these manually, or you can go to the GitHub repository and paste these in yourself. But let's see what this looks like. So if I refresh, now we actually see a fully styled screen with the button here. If I click it, now we see battle mode. So I think the next step here is going to be to start setting up the battle mode a bit. And there's a couple of different things that we can think about, right? There was the characters on the screens, the health bars and the player summary. There was the announcer at the bottom. There's quite a few different components to the battle mode itself. But I think I just want to create the battle mode component and do one little bit at a time and kind of just go from there. So let's start by creating a new folder in the components folder called battle menu, just like we did with start menu. So go ahead and do that and we'll move forward. All right, I've created that new battle menu folder and component and all of that. I made sure to add my index.js where I'm exporting that, but always, always, always don't forget to the tongue twister. Don't go, ooh, got me again. Don't forget to go to the components level index.js and export it there as well. So always remember to do that one. So there's several different places you have to export from if you want to follow the same structure that I use. Again, you can use your own structure, but this is how I like to do my project. So let's go ahead and look at the battle menu. So in here, I'm just returning battle menu component. So I think obviously the next step here is going to be to render out the battle menu component here. So I am now rendering out the battle menu component, and I just want to make sure that it says battle menu component here. Make sure it's rendering good. It is, so that's awesome. I'm going to go ahead and start thinking about what I want to work on first in this component. So just thinking about it logically, and what seems to be the easiest to start on to me is going to be the little health bar, but it's not just a health bar, right? There's a health bar, and then above that is the level, and I think maybe the character's name and a little bit of information about that. So I'm actually going to call that particular component the player summary, but I want to take the health bar concept and put that into its own component. So really the player summary, that little square you see with the health bar in it and the player's name and all of that, that is going to be two components. It is going to be the player summary, which is going to contain some information, and it's also going to contain the health bar component, which we'll just call bar just to make it short. So what I'm going to do is, since I know I need to create two components, I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we can move forward. So again, create two new components, player summary and bar, put in the boilerplate stuff, and then we can move forward. So having created my bar component and my player summary component, and also exporting them in both of the areas where I need to export them, I am ready to start working on the player summary. Now, as you know, if you've watched a lot of my videos, I like to just kind of paste in the CSS. I've done a lot of tutorials in the past where I go over every single line of CSS, but I think for the most part, most people are on my tutorials for the JavaScript side of things and the overall functionality and architecture of how these things are laid out. So I'm going to paste in the CSS for the bar and for the player summary components. And you can, again, get this from the GitHub repository, which is in the description, or you can copy it in manually if you'd like to. So for the bar, I'm going into the styles folder and I'm pasting in all of the styles for that. And I'm about to do the exact same thing for the player summary. So now I have all of the CSS for the player summary and the bar. Of course, we don't have any of the HTML markup for that stuff yet, but as we begin to fill it out, since the styles are already there, it's going to start looking good immediately as we are putting all of this in. And that way we can focus solely on the logic and functionality of the JavaScript stuff. And all right, I think what I want to do is start with the player summary. So jumping into the player summary here, there's a couple of things that I know we want to display. We want to display the name of the character, the level of the character, and we want to also show the health bar inside of there. And if you remember looking at the demo, there was two player summaries. There was one for Megaman and one for Samus. The one for Megaman was blue, and the one for Samus was like a reddish color. So we're actually going to have a conditional class name as well, which is going to pass in either, actually, we might not do a class name. We're probably going to do just a styles const that will switch whether or not it's Samus or Megaman. So we're going to use two hexes, two hex values, and I'm going to put these here at the top. So we are going to do red, and I'm just going to put in this hex value here, which is going to be 821,200. So that's going to be our red. And then we're going to do a blue, which will be a hex value of 1953 CB. So that's going to be our red and our blue, and we're going to make the background of this div that color conditionally based on whether or not it's the main character or the opponent. So we don't have that concept yet. So let's actually say that we're going to put in a prop here called main, and that's going to be a Boolean. If it's the main character, in other words, you, first player, then this will be true. If it's the opponent or the AI, this will be false. So we will put in a style block here and conditionally set the background color. So the background color is going to be red if main is false, and it will be blue if main is true. Actually, it might be the opposite. If we look at that demo again, it might actually be the opposite. So for now, I'm just going to say if it's the main, let's pass in red. Otherwise, let's pass in blue. Yeah, that might actually look better. So just keep that in mind. Right now, if the main prop is true, we're going to return red for the background color. Otherwise, we're going to return blue. So let's start displaying some stuff in here. Right now, I have player summary component. And actually, let's render this component so we can see it as we go. So I'm going to jump into the player summary. The app component. And you can see we're rendering the battle menu. So jumping into the battle menu component, we actually want to render a player summary for now. So let's actually create 2 divs. The first one should have a class name of probably something like styles.main or maybe opponent. And actually, I apologize. This really shouldn't be called battle menu. I was calling it menu because we have start menu and end menu and then battle. Like I just thought menu. We will actually have a battle menu component that is different than this. So I'm actually just going to call this component battle. So I need to go in here and rename this from battle menu to battle. Sorry to throw that one on you really quick, but definitely had a hiccup with that. So you got to make sure you update all of your imports or your exports as well. So now it is called battle. It is not called battle menu. But again, we will have a battle menu. We just right now do not. Okay, there we go. So all my imports and exports are updated. So what I was getting at though, is that inside of the battle component, I want to have 2 player summaries. I want to have one for the opponent, and I also want to have one for the user. So we have one for the opponent and one for the user. And inside of each of these divs, we're going to throw in another div with a class name of summary. So both of these are going to get this same div here with the class name of summary. And then inside of here is where we're actually going to render our player summary. Now for the opponent, we want main to equal false. And then for the user, we want main to equal true. So we actually can just pass it in like this. And while we're here, what we could probably do is make that a conditional, or an optional prop. So inside of the player summary, we could actually set a default to say that it's false by default. So if we don't provide it, it's going to be false. So then I don't have to provide it here. And then here I can just say main. So that's just a little bit cleaner, I think. And let's see what's coming up on the screen. So now it's saying we have a bit of an error. This is coming from app.js, and it might just be that I need to restart my server because I renamed that component. I think that's what it is. So what I will do is just simply close out my server. You might have to do this as well, and then restart it. And once that boots up, I should not have that error any longer. Okay, I do. Okay, it says, oh, I know exactly what it is. I changed all the imports and the exports and everything, but one thing that I did not do was change the actual name of the function here. So the name of the function here needs to be battle as well. So anyway, we can see player summary component is blue, player summary component, this one is red. So what do we want to put in there? I think we want to let's start by putting the player's name in there, but we're going to need objects that represent each of the characters, right? Because we're going to have level, health, like max health, etc. So we're going to need like 2 objects that represent each of the characters basically. So let's go and hop into the folder here. And you can see I've already created a shared folder. You're going to want to make sure you have that with an index.js. And I'm going to create a new file in here called characters.js. So new file, characters.js. And I'm going to put this information in here. Now, just looking at this, you can see player stats and opponent stats. Obviously, player stats is going to be Megaman because you're going to be Megaman, and then opponent stats are going to be Samus. You can switch these if you'd like to. These are the stats that I chose. Again, you don't have to choose these exact same stats. This is just what I found to be fun when I was playing around with it. The max health is going to be the maximum amount of health. So in other words, if they have 177, that's 100% health for Megaman. If it's like 7, then I don't know, whatever that percentage is, 7 out of 177. This is the denominator. The image path, this is the path to the image. Now, if you remember towards the beginning, we put that assets folder in the public folder. If we take a look here, we have megaman.ping and samus.ping. These are just paths to those images so that we can use this to display the image for the given character. So this is what I'm putting in there. I'm going to save this. And I want to use these objects inside of my player summary to display the name and the level and all of that good stuff. So there's a couple of things we're going to want to pass in as props for the player summary. So back in my player summary component, we have main here as with the default of false, but we're going to want a couple other things. We're going to want a name, a level, health, and then we're also going to want max health. And what we can do is inside of the main div here, we'll add in a few other divs. And I use divs. You can use better elements if you'd prefer. It's just, I like to use divs. So the first one I will call info, styles.info. And in here, I'm just going to be putting in the name and the level. So I can put in two other divs. The first one is going to render out the name. And I better give this a class name of styles.name. And I'm going to copy this line and paste another one below. But this is going to be the level. So instead of name, it'll be level. And we will also render out the level here. But before that, we're also going to hard code LVL like that. So we can say level and then actually render the level for the character after that. So that's what that'll look like, level. And then, whoops, I'm on the wrong line. Hold on. There we go. Level, LVL, boom. Okay. So below the info, we will render the health bar. So that'll get its own div, and then it'll be a class name of styles.health, I guess. And then in here, we can render the bar component. Now the bar component right now, if I click into it, is just rendering the word bar component. So I'm actually going to empty that out for now. And that way it's not rendering text when I have this here, but we're also going to be passing in a couple of props. So we're going to have a label, which will just be called HP here. And we will have a value equal to health. Now health is being passed in as a prop here. So we're just basically passing it through to this component. And then the same thing with max health. It cares about both of those values because that's what we're going to use to calculate how much of the health bar is full at any given time. So since we added those, we need to go into the bar component and actually add those as props here, or accept them as props, I should say. Label, health, and max health. So right now, I'm just wondering what we have here. Okay, so this is what it looks like. And it looks like that because we're not passing in any of the props to the player summary. And also we haven't done anything inside of the bar component in terms of the HTML markup. So what I want to do is jump into the bar component. Since the markup for the bar is going to be pretty simple, I think we should just knock that out really quick and then go back and add the props to where we're rendering out these player summaries. So in the bar component, we are going to have a div at the top of this main, and this div is going to have a class name of label, styles.label to be specific. And here we're just going to render out the label. Then below this, we will have another div, and we're going to give it a class name of styles.max. Now remember, we've added all these styles already in the CSS file. And then in here, we will have yet another div, and I'll explain what this is in a second, called styles.value in terms of the class name. And then we are going to do an inline style here. So style, pass in an object, and we want to set the width of this dynamically, and we're going to calculate the width based on both the health and the max health. So we're going to use two backticks to string interpolate, and then use a $sign and two curly braces to put in some JavaScript to this string, to render out a string using JavaScript, basically. So we're going to do a calculation. So inside of parentheses here, we're going to say value divided by max value. And then we're going to take that quotient, I believe it's called, and multiply it by 100. And then outside of the curly braces, we're going to put a % symbol. Now, instead of calling it value and max value, I think we called it health and max health. So let's call it health. Let's actually rename this to be value and max value, and I'll explain why in a second. So the props here are value and max value because this bar component can now be used as something else other than health. Like for example, if we want to have an experience points bar, we can reuse this for experience points. I don't think we're going to do that in this tutorial, but I just want you to kind of think about these sort of things. You want to write components in such a way where you can reuse them. Even if you might not, it's still really good to do that as long as it's not going to be an extra amount of work. So since I renamed those those props over here, I need to come down here and rename them here as well. So instead of, it looks like I already did that here, but instead of max health, we want to call it max value. Now I think that should work, but we're not passing in the props to these player summaries, which I think we're rendering those in the battle component. Yeah. So we need to pass in all of the correct props to these player summaries here. So the first one, we don't need to pass in the main prop because it defaults to false already. But the health, we want to set that equal to opponent health, which we will have as state up here. So we're going to keep track of the health of both of those characters inside of this battle component. So let's create 2 chunks of state, and we'll initialize these as the max. So when you first start a game, you're going to be full health, and your full health should always be equal to your max health, right? So we are going to initialize these as the max health of each of the characters. So let's start with the opponent. So opponent stats dot max health. You can see that opponent stats was automatically imported for me. So that's cool. And so this will be opponent health. And then set opponent health. So make sure I don't have a typo there. And I'm going to do the same exact thing for the player health. Or I guess we could call it, yeah, let's call it player health. So player health and set player health. And we want to set this instead of equal to opponent stats.max health, we're going to do player stats.max health. So now I'm importing both of those, initializing these pieces of state, and now I can pass in the health to the summary. But I'm also going to pass in the other pieces of information about the character. I think the health is the only thing that's going to be dynamic in this tutorial. Everything else is going to be constant. So I don't need to use state like this for those things. I can just use those constant values. So which constant values are there? We need the name. So the name of the character is going to be opponent stats.name. And then we need the level and the max health. So the level is going to be opponent stats, stats.level. And then we also need the same thing for max health. So max health is equal to opponent stats dot max health. And I'm going to copy all of these and add these down to the other one as well. But instead of this being for the opponent, this is going to be for the player. So I'm just going to replace the word opponent with player in each of these. Well, I guess I only need this part. So paste, paste, paste. Okay, so saving that, we now have 2 player summaries with all of the correct information pasted into the props. Let's see what it renders. Okay, that looks cool. So I'm actually going to put both of these screens on here at the same time. And I want to actually see what happens if I take the health for, say, the player, which is this red one here with Megaman in it. I'm going to take the health and just put it down to like 41 and save. And as you can see, it just slid down. And that's because we reduced the amount of health out of the max health. And if we look at what the bar is doing, this is where we get to talk a little bit about how this is working. There is a div called max, which is this gray div, okay? So this gray rectangle is that max div. Then there's another rectangle that's actually inside of that, which is this one, which is the value. And we're just setting the width of that smaller rectangle inside of this big one on the ratio of value to max value. So yeah, that's how we're basically doing the bar there. So I'm going to put that back, and now we can start thinking about what to do next. So personally, when I look at this, I think the next thing I want to work on is probably the battle menu. So just the little selector that allows you to choose attack, magic, or heal. So I think I'm going to work on that. So originally, why I called the battle component the battle menu component. Now we're going to actually go in and create the real battle menu component. So you know what to do. Just create a new folder called battle menu and add in all of the boilerplate code. I'm going to make sure that I put a capital M there. So I am just doing my final export here at the components level index file and good to go. So I'm just going to plop in the CSS again. So make sure to go to the GitHub repository or copy it manually if you desire. I'm actually using CSS grid for this one. So got a bunch of CSS in here. With that out of the way, I can focus on the React component side of things. This is just going to consist of 3 divs inside of this main div. So I'm going to create a div with a class name of option. And there will be 3 options, right? There's going to be attack, magic, and heal. I'm going to create this and then paste it 2 times below, replace this with magic, and then replace this one with heal. Then we are going to take 3 props to this battle menu component. We're going to take on attack, on magic, and on heal. So on attack, on magic, and on heal. Simple enough, right? And as you could probably guess, each of these are going to have on-click methods that just simply call these props here. So on-click for this is on attack, since this is the attack one. And I'm going to paste these in and just replace the correct wording here. On heal, boom. Okay, so that is actually the entire component. We just need to render it. So let's go to the battle component, go here down to the bottom, inside of the main div, but below the user div, we're gonna, as you could probably guess, create a div. I should make a t-shirt called create a div, or a t-shirt that says create a div on it. Anyway, so class name styles dot, I'm gonna call this HUD child. And in here, we're just gonna render the battle menu. Now the battle menu took those 3 props. It has on heal, on magic, and on attack. Right now, we don't actually have the logic for that. So what we wanna do is probably just console.log the action as we do it. So attack and just copy, paste some stuff, boom, boom, on attack, on magic, on heal, and then replace the console.log with the correct word. So now I have this battle menu component, and when I click on these, I should see in the console the associated action logged to the screen. So opening up the console here, click start game, and as you can see, I see attack, magic, and heal. If I click attack, we see attack logged here, magic, and heal. Okay, so that's working as expected. I'm gonna go ahead and paste in my battle CSS so that we can start seeing things the way they're supposed to be. I'm going to copy in the battle CSS. This is going to be a big one, so if you are going to copy this one manually, you're going to want to pause when this happens and look through all of this. But most people are probably just going to want to copy the CSS. So in my battle folder, in the styles.module.css, I'm pasting in all of this CSS, and I'm going to just quickly talk about a few of these things. The first one is we are importing a Google font. So we're using a Google font here, which gives us that kind of 8-bit font. I think it's called Press Start 2-player. So we're using this font. Down here, you can see a bunch of styles for the header, the summary, things we have yet to really implement, including the characters, the images. But one thing I really wanted to quickly point out are these animations. So we are going to be utilizing these animations to do the animations when certain things happen within the game. And we're going to trigger these by adding in a class. So if we look here, we have the shake animation. This is implemented when the magic class is applied. So when somebody is doing a magic attack, we are going to add the magic class. That animation will then begin, and then we're going to take away the magic class, and that animation will stop. And that is how we're going to be applying animations throughout this. And as you can see, we're just using keyframes for the animations. We have one for flash, which is when you take a damage. And as for the attack animation, I think it's actually a really simple one somewhere in here because it doesn't actually require much animation. It just moves it forward and then back. That's probably why there isn't a animation here. Yeah, you could see the attack class just sets the transform translate 100 pixels forward or backwards, depending on if it's the opponent or the player. So yeah, just wanted to kind of like talk about that really quick because most of this is very simple CSS, but occasionally we have kind of a little bit more complicated stuff. I just wanted to make sure you were all understanding how this works. Okay, so I'm assuming you've got all of your CSS for the battle component in there. So I'm going to take a look at the browser, and that looks quite a lot better. It's still not quite perfect, but we still have a lot of stuff to add, but so far so good. Okay, this is going to be the perfect opportunity to talk about how we are going to handle the sequencing of the turn-based battle system. Okay, so if you think about this logically, when there's 2 characters on the screen, which there will be, Megaman on the left, Samus on the right, and we'll talk more about this in a minute once these characters are up there so that you can have a better mental model of how this is going to work, but I just want to make sure we start this conversation now and just kind of understand how this is going to work. So when you click attack, there's going to be a sequence that plays out that needs to complete before the next thing can happen. Same with the opponent. The opponent, when the opponent chooses their attack, there's a sequence that needs to go through before you're allowed to then choose your next move. That sequence is basically going to be the battle announcer saying something, some animations happening, the health going down or going up, depending on if you attacked or if you healed, the opponent or player damage animation, etc. And then finally, the announcer saying, okay, now it's the other person's turn. So there's a sequence of events that has to happen between turns. So keeping that concept in your head, that's going to help us understand why we're making certain decisions along the way moving forward. But I just want to say the next thing we're going to do is put the characters' sprites on the screen and get the layout of this thing looking right. And then after that, we're going to create a hook, a React hook that we'll call use battle sequence that is going to contain a lot of state around the concept of the battle. And when certain pieces of that state changes, it's going to activate certain aspects of that sequence. And we're going to have to keep track of that sequence throughout so that we can always know which part of the sequence we're in. And throughout that sequence also, we're going to be applying and taking away certain classes, CSS classes, from certain elements, because as I explained a moment ago, by adding and taking away classes, we are essentially starting and stopping animations. So just wanted to get your mind primed for that before we get these characters on the screen here. Let's get the characters on the screen. So gonna head over to my battle component, and let's take a look at where we want to put these guys. And lady. Well, spoiler alert, I'm pretty sure everybody knows by now Samus is a woman. But let's see. So I think, I'm just kind of looking at my notes here to see where I want to put this. We will put a div in between the player summaries, in between the two player summaries. So right here, we'll put a div, and the div will have a class name of styles.characters. And this will consist of some children, the first one being class name of game header. And this game header is just going to have a little bit of text. So this one's pretty easy. Player stats dot name. And then we're going to say versus opponent stats dot name. So obviously that's going to say Megaman versus Samus. Then below that, we want to put our game images. So a div with a class name of styles dot, game images. Okay. And inside of here, we will put two sprite divs. The first one will be class name player sprite. And the second one will be class name opponent sprite. So I will throw that one 2 lines down here. This will be opponent sprite. So inside of the player sprite, we want to render an image, obviously. And the source we already have, right? The source is going to be player stats.image, because we already have that path. Now we want to give an alt here for accessibility, so we'll just give it the name. So player stats.name. And then the third thing we want to do is add in a class name. Now this is where we're going to be adding in the class names that are going to animate the image. So for now, I'm going to actually comment this out. I'm putting it here so you can see it, but then we're going to comment it out for now because we don't have the logic to set these animations. You'll see what I mean by that. But for now, I just want to comment it out so that you can remember that we're going to come back to this. So for this second one, I just pasted in the same image into this opponent sprite, and I'm going to change it obviously from player stats to opponent stats in both of these scenarios here. So let's see what we have on the screen. Okay, pretty cool. We have Megaman versus Samus. But I'm seeing that it's a little bit condensed, right? I don't really want it to be that condensed. So let's see if we can get everything. This main div here must need to have a class name or something. So let's see what we need to do to get this bigger and take up the full screen instead of this small section of the screen. If I had to guess, it's probably something to do, well, okay. So I've discovered the issue on my end. I have this div here with a class name of main in my battle component. I actually want to get rid of this div and just make it an empty fragment like that. And then I have to go to the associated closing one and make that an empty fragment as well. And that should release my issue. Okay, that released that issue, but it caused a new one, which is now that menu is a little bit condensed here at the bottom. The reason why that is because this HUD child needs to be inside of another div called HUD. Now this HUD, so I'm going to copy this, paste this into this parent div, get rid of the child aspect of it. The reason why there is going to be HUD and HUD child is because there's multiple types of things that can be in this main HUD. There could be the battle announcer, and there can also be this battle menu, and it depends on which part of the battle sequence we're in. Right now, we've only created the battle menu. We haven't created that battle sequence component yet. So there's only one HUD child, but there's potentially going to be multiple. So that's what that looks like. If I go in here now, we can see it takes up the full size of the screen. And one more thing, let's actually put this HUD inside of the user div. So we have this user div. Let's put that at the bottom of the user div. And now that looks a lot better. Perfect. Okay, the next step we need to do before we get into the full battle system sequence thing, which is going to be really the crux of this code here, we want to do the battle announcer. So if you remember watching the demo at the beginning, this battle menu was on the right side, and then the battle announcer kind of window was on the left. Then when the animation sequence was happening, the battle announcer took up the full width, and we hid the battle menu because obviously you're not supposed to be able to attack while the sequence is happening. So just some things to keep in mind. We want to add the battle announcer component. Let's create a new component called battle announcer. So I've created the new component, and I just need to export it from my components level index file. Battle announcer is exported. Now let's grab the CSS for this. Inside of my battle announcer, I'm going to my styles.module.css file and pasting in my CSS. Very simple stuff. In fact, this component is going to be very simple, but there is going to be a little bit of unique logic, which is the fact that we want the messages to be typed out, kind of like a typewriter, or, like, I don't know what you would call it, but a lot of older turn-based battle games like Pokemon, for example, would type the messages out instead of them just appearing. I think it looks cooler and just feels a little bit more dynamic and interactive. So inside of my battle announcer component, I'm really only going to have one thing inside of this main div, which is a div with the class name of message. So styles.message, and we're going to pass in a typed message. Okay, so first of all, this battle announcer component needs to take a message and then convert this message into a typed message. Now, if we can think about the typed message, I'm going to explain this verbally first, and then we're going to go into the code. A typed message is going to incrementally become the full message. Okay, let me say that one more time. So at first, the typed message is going to be empty. Let's say it's hello. The typed message is going to incrementally become the word hello. So it's going to become H, then it's going to be HE, then it's going to be HEL, then it's going to be HELL, then it's going to be HELLO. So it's going to incrementally become the word hello. So how can we do that? Well, we are going to use a hook that we're going to create called use typed message. So const typed message is equal to use typed message. Now we don't have this hook yet. We're going to create it, but we're going to pass in the message into this use typed message. And this hook is going to handle incrementally building this message into a typed message so that it looks like it's being typed on the screen in front of you. So let's create a new hook in my hooks folder. So I have this hooks folder, and I have an index.js for this hooks folder. You don't have to use these index.js files, and you can import them from the file directly, but most of the time I like to import from the directory. It's just a little cleaner when you have multiple hooks in the same file. But anyway, I'm going to create a new file called usetypedMessage.js, export const usetyped message. And this is going to take in the message, which is a string, and we're going to incrementally build out that message. Now, we're going to have a piece of state called typed message. So const equals use state. And we're going to initialize this as an empty string. And this will be called typed message. And we will need set typed message. And at the end of this hook, we just simply want to return typed message. So right now, all this hook does is accept a message and return an empty string. That's fine, but I want to come back here and just make sure that I import my hook. So I'm going to make sure I export it from my index file. Again, you don't have to do all this. Again, if that's confusing to you, make sure to watch that video on how I set up my React projects. All right. So right now, typed message will always just be an empty string. So let's fix that. How are we going to build this string out? Well, we're going to need one helper method called wait. We're going to create a helper method called wait, which is going to allow us to pass in a number of milliseconds for us to wait before moving on, basically. We're going to take a for loop, and we're going to loop through the length of message. For every single item in there, we're going to wait 25 milliseconds and then add the next letter into the string. And that is how we're going to essentially build this thing out. So I'm going to use an effect. Whoops. And we just want to put message in here because every time the message changes, we want to restart this process and type out, essentially recreate typed message to whatever this has changed to. Before we go too much further, I think we should create our helper wait method. So inside of my shared folder over here on the left, I'm going to create a new file called helpers.js. I'm going to export a new const called wait, which is going to be a function which takes in some number of milliseconds and then returns a new promise. Now, this promise is going to only resolve, it's never going to reject, and we want to run a set timeout. And the set timeout length is going to be equal to the milliseconds that we're passing into this wait function. And all we want to do is resolve after that time has passed. So again, all this wait function is doing is taking in milliseconds, returning a new promise, setting a timeout, and once that number of milliseconds has passed through, we're resolving the promise. Very simple. So inside of my shared folder, I'm actually going to export my helpers. It looks like I forgot to export characters. So since I forgot to export characters, if I go to my battle component, the way that it's being imported is not my preference. So I'm going to remove this and just, import it directly from shared like that. So you don't have to do all that. That's just how I like to do it. So now we have that wait function. So since we have that wait function, we can start to build the logic here. So whenever message changes, the first thing we want to do is reset typed message to be an empty string. And then we want to make sure that the message has a length, because if it doesn't, we don't really need to be doing this timeout logic. It's just a waste of computing power. And we're going to use an IIFE here. So an immediately invoked function expression. That is something in JavaScript that allows us to create a function and then execute it immediately. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I'm going to be using async await. Okay, so in order to use async await here, I need to use an IIFE. If you're not sure why that is or what I'm talking about whatsoever, go Google that really quick. Otherwise, let's move forward. So I'm going to put in 2 curly braces, and then I'm going to put in like a arrow function here, and then I'm going to put 2 curly braces that executes that block right there. And then here I'm going to put async, which allows me to use async and await here. So let's say let visible message. Visible message is going to be the part of the message that you are currently seeing. It's only the part of the message that is incrementally built up thus far. And we're going to do a for loop. So let's start the for loop with let I equals 0. Very typical for loop stuff. I is less than message dot length, and then simply IA++. So the first thing we want to do is just await, because remember wait returns a promise, so we're allowed to call await here, and we want to wait 25 milliseconds. Once that 25 milliseconds has gone up, we want to take visible message and set it equal to visible message plus message I, which is the current letter on the word that we're currently on in this for loop. Then once that has happened, we can set the typed message equal to visible message. And that is all of the logic for our hook. So I'm going to get rid of some of this empty space here that's not needed. This hook now officially allows us to incrementally build a string with a 25 millisecond delay between each character. All right, so I wonder if we have everything we need in order to actually see this thing in action, right? So we have the battle announcer component. We have the typed message hook. So let's actually add this battle announcer component to our battle component. So where do we want to put it? Well, remember, it's going to go inside of the HUD as a HUD child. And we want it on the left side. So I'm going to put it above this battle menu. So we'll create a div. It needs to have a class of styles.HUDChild. And this one is going to be the battle announcer. Now, battle announcer takes a message. And let's initialize this message as our very first message that we want to see on the screen. So if we have an announcer message, which we don't yet, that's a string that we'll create in just a second, a piece of state. Then we want to render that otherwise, so we're short-circuiting here. Otherwise, we want to render a string that says what will, and then I'm going to interpolate a string here, player stats dot name. So this announcer message is going to be a piece of state that we are going to move into a hook along with these 2 pieces of state. But for now, I'm going to actually put it up here so that we don't get an error, and I'll initialize it as an empty string. So announcer message, set announcer message So now we should no longer get an error there. And let's see what happens when we click start game. Look at that. It built out that message. So I'm going to refresh, watch that again. It's typing it out. How cool is that? All right, so now this is starting to look pretty good. I think we're at the point where we can now start to build out our battle sequence. Before we actually work on the sequence, we need to think about certain things like how is the attack, the magic, and the heal logic going to interact with the health of the characters? And how is it going to take their stats into account and that sort of thing? So first thing I want to do is create a few helpers that are going to run those calculations for us. These are going to be extremely simple calculations. Real video games are going to use much more sophisticated calculations, but this is just a simple tutorial. I'm not a math genius. So let's go ahead and just do the simple version here. So back over to my helpers file. I'll close everything we don't need here. I'm going to paste in a couple of functions here. So we have attack, magic, and heal. Okay. So attack is going to take the attacker and the receiver. And the attacker and receiver are actually going to be those player objects. So the entire object, if you remember, we have a constants, or actually I think it's a characters.js file where we have an object for each character. We're passing in these whole objects to these functions. Okay, so it takes an attacker and a receiver for attack. It takes a attacker and a receiver for magic. But in terms of healing, we only care about the receiver. So attack, the received damage is going to be equal to the attack of the attacker minus the attacker level minus the receiver level. And then we're taking that and multiplying it by 1.25. That is going to be the received damage. But then we want to take the defense of the receiver into account. So we are saying received damage minus the receiver defense divided by 2. So this calculation is just a very simple calculation I came up with. Again, it's not sophisticated. You can even change this if you want. If you feel like you could do a better job of this, these calculations, please do that. That'd be amazing. And I'd love to come back and make a much more sophisticated version of this. But this is really just the MVP of this project. So magic is going to be pretty much the exact same thing, right? But instead of using the receiver defense, we're using magic defense, and we're using magic instead of attack here. Now heal is just taking in the receiver because the heal only happens on one character. It's not a multi-character interaction. So we're just taking the receiver magic plus the receiver level and multiplying it by a quarter. Okay. So those are the 3 functions that we're going to need in order to be able to actually do our sequences. The only other thing I really want to get out of the way before we work on the sequence is the logic for the opponent to choose their move. So basically like an AI, we're going to create a hook called use AI opponent, which is going to have the logic of selecting a move randomly from a list. So that's going to be in our hooks folder. Create a new hook called use AI opponent. I better spell that right. .js. Go ahead and export const use AI opponent. And what we want this thing to do is to accept a turn. So there is going to be the concept of a turn, right? If the turn is, let's say 0, then it's the player's turn. If the turn is 1, then it is the AI's turn. And since this is a hook, we're going to be feeding data into this thing at any given point. There's probably better ways to approach this, but I wanted to use a hook for this basically. So let's create a piece of state called AI choice and set AI choice. Set that equal to use state, initialize it as an empty string. And that's what we're going to be returning from this hook. Now the logic is going to go inside of an effect, and the dependency array is just going to contain the turn. And whenever the turn changes, we're going to run this logic. If turn is equal to 1, then we know it's the opponent's turn. And if it's the opponent's turn, we need to go ahead and select either attack, magic, or heal, and then set that as the AI choice. So the options are going to be attack, magic, or heal. Magic or heal. And what we want to do is just set the AI choice equal to a random one of those. Now, this is a piece of code I've used like a million times. I always Google for it. So this isn't really something you need to fully understand how it works. But basically, this little bit of code is going to select a random item from an array. And the array that we want to select a random item from is this options array. So what it is options. And then the selector is going to be math.floor. And then inside of here, math.random. We're going to multiply math.random by the length of the options. And that is going to allow us to randomly choose one of these from this list and set it as the AI choice. Super simple. Don't forget to export it from the index file. Cool. So now I think we have every single thing that we need in order to get started on the crux of this whole tutorial, which is the battle sequence. So what is the battle sequence? So as I was talking about, in between turns, there's going to be a sequence of events that takes place, including animations, the health draining, the typed message from the announcer. These are things that are going to happen in a specific order. And we're going to want to encapsulate all of this logic into a hook called use battle sequence. So what is it we're going to need to get from this hook? Like what variables are we going to be pulling from this hook? We're going to get the turn. We're going to get whether or not we are in the sequence, in a sequence, I should say. We're going to get the player health, the opponent health. We are going to get the player animation, the opponent animation, and also the announcer message. So as you can tell, this is really going to be the hub and the logic of all of the things that are dynamic about the battle itself, other than the user and the AI choice for the attack and heal and all that. So the only asynchronous kind of like dynamic logic that sits outside of this use battle sequence hook is the choice for the character's moves. All right, so what are we going to have to pass into this hook in order to get the results that I just basically said? Well, we are going to pass an object that we are going to call a sequence. And so this object is going to contain two things. It's going to contain a turn and a mode. A turn is going to be either 0 or 1. Remember, from the AI choice, 0 is the player's turn, 1 is the opponent's turn. And then there's going to be a mode. The mode is either going to be attack, heal, or magic. Okay, so the mode is essentially what attack or what magic or whatever. What are we doing? Is it attack, magic, or heal? And the turn is going to be whose turn is it? Very simple. We're going to build that object and we're going to pass it in to the use battle sequence hook. Then there's going to be an effect that runs whenever that mode or whenever that sequence changes. There's going to be an effect that runs and returns all of those things that I was talking about earlier. And just to repeat, those variables that we want this hook to return are turn, in sequence, player health, opponent health, player animation, opponent animation, and announcer message. Cool. So let's create a new hook. So coming over here, we're going to call this use battle sequence.js. And let's go ahead and get the boilerplate out of the way. So export const use battle sequence is equal to a function. Now, this is going to have all of those things that I was talking about. It's going to return as state. So we're going to need a turn, set turn, that's use state. We're going to initialize that as 0, which means that the very first, when we start the game, it's going to be the player's turn because it's 0. And then when it's 1, it'll be the opponent's turn. We're going to need in sequence, which is going to be whether or not we are in the sequence or in a sequence. I keep saying the sequence, but there's multiple, right? In sequence and set in sequence. Am I spelling this right? I'm not. Haha. Equals use state. And we're going to set this as false initially, because we're not going to be in a sequence as the game starts initially. We're going to get the player health and the opponent health. If you remember right now, those are actually in the battle component as we speak. So there's 3 things in here, right? There's announcer message, player health, and opponent health. I'm just going to cut these completely out of the battle component and move them into the use battle sequence hook, which means we're also going to need the import for the opponent stats and the import for the player stats. We are also going to need the player animation and the opponent animation. So let's get those. And they are both going to be set initially as the word, the string static. So player animation and set player animation. We're going to do the same thing for the opponent animation. It will be static as well. Cool. So this is all of the state we're going to need for this sequence. Now, there are going to be different states for the animation. For example, there's going to be damage, there's going to be magic, and static. So I think there's only going to be 3, magic, damage, and static. And depending on what those are, we're going to return that, and the battle component is going to apply a certain class name to those character sprites depending on the animation of either the player or the opponent. So as I was saying, there's going to be an effect that gets triggered whenever the sequence changes, which is going to be setting all of these things and returning them all. But before we do that, let's just return everything here. So return turn, in sequence, player health, opponent health, announcer message, player animation, and opponent animation. So now we are returning all of the pieces of state. So basically this hook is just consolidating all of this logic to one specific area so that our battle component isn't this massive file. Like it's already pretty big, right? We don't need to make it any bigger. So we have an effect, and we're going to run this effect whenever sequence changes. So the only thing in this dependency array is going to be the sequence. And the sequence is going to be what we accept as a prop to this hook. Okay, let's talk about how we are going to do this. Well, first of all, we're going to destructure two things out of this sequence object, right? Remember I said it's going to have two things, a mode and a turn. So let's destructure those out, mode and turn. And depending on the mode and the turn, we are going to apply certain animations to certain characters and so on. So the first thing I want to do is just make sure that mode exists. So if mode, now we're inside of an if block, and all of the logic is going to go inside of this if block. And I think what we want to do to make this as clean as possible is to switch on mode, because mode can be one of three things, right? It can be magic, heal, or attack. So let's do a switch statement. Let's switch on mode, and let's start with the scenario of attack, because I think that's the most simple to kind of think about. So what do we want to do in the case of attack? Well, the first thing we want to do is calculate the amount of damage that the attack is going to create. So const damage, and remember we have those helpers. We're going to call the attack helper. And if we go look at that helper, it takes the attacker and the receiver. So who's the attacker and who is the receiver? Well, we need to calculate that. And I think it's going to be the same for each of these cases in the switch. So I can actually go outside of the switch, but still inside of the if block and set the attacker and the receiver. So the attacker, we're going to use a ternary statement. So if the turn is equal to 0, then we know that the player stats is what we are going to calculate as the attacker. Otherwise, it's going to be the opponent stats. And the receiver is just simply going to be the exact opposite of that. So now we actually have the attacker and the receiver. The attacker is going to be either the player stats object, which if I hover over it, you can see is just this const here that we created earlier, or the opponent stats, and same with the receiver, it's going to be the opposite. So now we are saying damage is equal to attack, and we're passing in the attacker and the receiver, and that attack function is going to run the calculation to return the amount of damage we are going to cause, or whoever is going to cause for this particular sequence. So now that we have the amount of damage, we are going to want to jump into an asynchronous function, because we are going to be doing some logic where we're going to be doing some, how do I say this? We're going to wait. We're going to do something, and then we're going to wait some amount of time for an animation to complete. And then we're going to do another thing and then wait, and then do another thing and wait. And that's going to be the sequence. And it's different depending on the mode and the turn. So the very first thing we want to do is create an IIFE again. That way we can do async. I just think it's a lot cleaner to do async await when there's going to be so many different asynchronous events, so that we're not nesting a ton of thens. So let's set in sequence to true. That's the very first thing we need to do, because now we are in a sequence. Now let's set the announcer message equal to a dynamic string here. Attacker.name has chosen to attack! Exclamation point. So now we're setting that announcer message, and we already have the logic set up for it to type that message out. So that announcer message gets set, and then it's going to type that out. Keep that in mind. We're going to wait 1,000 milliseconds. Remember that wait function we created? We're going to be using that a lot throughout here. So we're going to wait 1,000 milliseconds for that message to type out. It's just going to feel like the right amount of time, I think, for that message to type out, for the user to read it, and then for the next thing to happen, which is going to be to set the player or the opponent animation. So we know that we want to set the animation for whoever's attacking equal to attack. We don't know right now whether or not it's the player that's attacking or if it is the opponent that is attacking. So we're going to do a ternary statement and set that animation to attack. So if turn is equal to 0, and we're going to be doing this a lot, by the way, if turn is equal to 0, then we want to set the player animation to attack. Otherwise, if a turn is not equal to 0, then we know it is the opponent's turn. So we want to set the opponent animation to attack. And this is going to be the basic mechanism of how we're going to run the sequence. So if the turn is 0, we're going to set the player animation to attack. Otherwise, the opponent animation to attack. And then we're going to wait 100 milliseconds after that for that attack animation to complete, because that's how long that attack animation takes. That is how I have it set up in the CSS animations and all of that. So I want to wait exactly 100 milliseconds for that animation to complete. Then we're going to do the same thing for each part of the sequence. We're going to check whose turn it is, and then we're going to do something based on that. So set player animation to, I basically just copy this. I think that would be the easiest way to approach this, and then change the value. So now we want this to be static. Let me explain that. So the player animation or the opponent animation will now be static. So it attacks and now it's static. Now what we want to happen is to wait half a second. Then I'm going to paste in the next part of the sequence. We're going to set the damage. Now, hold on a second. Don't copy this yet because I need to switch something. If the turn is 0, then it was the player that was attacking. So who's getting damaged? It's actually the opposite. So now we want to switch set opponent animation with set player animation. So I just switched these two basically, and it'll be set as the animation for that accordingly will be set to damage. And we want to await 750 milliseconds for that one. Okay. Then I'm going to copy this again because now we want to, actually I want to copy this one, sorry. We want to reset the animation back to static. So I'm going to actually keep the same order. First one is opponent, second one is player, resetting it to static, but instead of 750 milliseconds, I think we just want to, we actually want to run one more thing, right? I'll explain that in a second, because once we set that back to static, we want to update the announcer message. So just to kind of run through what's going on here. The attack happens, then we stop the attack animation. Then we start the damage animation. Now we're stopping the damage animation, but at the same time that we stop the damage animation, we also want to update the announcer message. Okay, so set announcer message, and we want to say receiver.name felt that. Then we need to actually calculate the health. So depending on whether or not it's the opponent's turn or the player's turn, so I'll copy this ternary statement yet again. We want to set the opponent health or the player health accordingly. So the health, set opponent health. Well, what do we want to calculate that as? So when we have a state function, or when we use state, we can pull out the state with the first variable, and the second variable in the array is a function to update that state. But that function that updates that state, you can also pass a function into that. If you didn't already know that, that might be a new concept for you, but I'll explain what I mean by that. So set opponent health is a function that updates the opponent health state. Well, we can pass a function to this. So I'm going to say h, which is short for health. H is short for health. And I'm going to create an arrow function that is going to run a calculation h minus, and then we're going to do a ternary statement. So if the damage is greater than 0, then we want to do h minus damage, otherwise 0. So we're updating the opponent health if the damage was greater than 0. Otherwise, we're returning 0. And when I say damage is greater than 0, I mean h minus damage. So in other words, basically, if you just destroyed the opponent, if you killed the opponent, instead of setting a negative value, we just always want to make sure that it's 0. We don't want to go into the negatives for health because then it will create this weird situation. So we just always want to make the lowest value for this to always be 0. And we're going to run that same exact calculation in here. So I need to update that to say set player health. Okay. And then after those 3 things happen, we want to wait 2000 milliseconds. We're almost done with this particular sequence. Then there's 2 more if you remember. So after we wait 2000 milliseconds, we want to set the announcer message to say, now it's receiver.name turn. So now it might be like now it's Megaman's turn or now it's Samus's turn, exclamation point. Let's wait. Let's wait 1500 milliseconds here. And then let's stop the sequence by setting the turn. So the end of the sequence is going to be setting the turn to the other person's turn. So if turn is equal to 0, then we want it to be 1. Otherwise, we want to make it 0. And then finally, we can set in sequence to false. Okay, so very quickly, we're going to breeze through the other 2 because you understand the concept now, but I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. First thing we're doing is calculating who is the attacker, who is the receiver, based on the turn. Then we're going to say if the mode is attack, we're going to calculate the damage by calling the attack function and passing in the attacker and the receiver. Then we're going to hop into a sequence. We're going to set the sequence to true. We're going to set the announcer message, and then we're going to wait. Then we're going to set the animation to attack. Then we're going to stop that animation. Then we're going to set the damage animation to the opposite character. Then we're going to stop that animation, update the announcer message, calculate the health for that person who got hit, wait, update the message, And then we're going to set the turn to the other person's turn and set in sequence to false. That is how this mechanism works. We're going to do basically the exact same thing for heal and for magic. So let's go ahead and knock those two things out. And once we get those things knocked out, we should have a finished game. So I kind of want to see if this attack works, right? I want to see if this is working so far. So what I want to do is head back to the battle component and implement using the actual hook so that we can test and see if the battle sequence is working. We need to make sure we use the use battle sequence hook. And it looks like I might, there we go. So use battle sequence. And remember, we're going to pass in a sequence at any given point. We don't have the sequence state yet. We're going to need to create that. So it'll be red for now. And I need to spell it correctly. And everything we're going to pull out of here is going to be turn, in sequence, player health, opponent health. You know what? It's just easier just to go in and just copy the object. So just copy that object and paste it here. Okay. So the sequence we're going to need to set as state. So const sequence set sequence is equal to use state. Okay. Let's initialize that as just an empty object for now. And luckily, inside of this use battle sequence, inside of the effect, we're checking if mode exists before we run all this logic. So initializing it as an empty object without mode is fine. Underneath this, let's go ahead and get our AI choice. So const AI choice is equal to use AI choice. We already have that. Use AI opponent is what I should say. We already have that logic, and we need to just pass turn into there. And we are getting turn from our use battle sequence hook, which, if you remember, we're initializing to 0 right here. So now we have that. The only two other things, or actually the only other thing we need to do right now is to set the sequence. So use effect. Now this effect dependency array is going to happen on turn, AI choice, and in sequence. Inside of the effect, we're going to do an if check, and we're going to say if AI choice, whoops, if I could get in there, that'd be great. If AI choice and turn is equal to 1, and we're not in the middle of a sequence, then we want to set the sequence to be turn, because remember, sequence has a turn and a mode, and mode AI choice. Okay. Now, the only other place that we're going to be setting the sequence is when we choose an attack, right? So this is setting the sequence whenever the AI choice happens. But we also are going to be triggering sequences here. So instead of console.log attack, we're going to say set sequence, where the turn is going to be turn. We always have that piece of state, so we can always pass it into here. And the mode is going to be attack. So that's the only one we have right now, but I can go ahead and set the other ones. Just remember right now in the hook, we're only implementing attack at the moment. So pretty simple stuff there. I think that's everything we need. The only thing that we need to be able to do now is to set those animations. And I think we commented some stuff out right here, yes. So we actually have this ready to go in our images down here in the player sprite and opponent sprite divs. We have these images where we commented out the class name. This is where we're going to dynamically, so I'm using my square brackets here. If you understand how CSS modules works, it is an object. So instead of saying styles dot and then say static, for example, or attack, we can use square brackets and pass in a variable that represents a string, which in this case is player animation. And then for the opponent, we want to do the same thing, but instead of player animation, it's going to be opponent animation. And let's just remember really quick how this is working. Opponent animation and player animation are both coming from our use battle sequence hook here. As you can see, if we go inside of our hook thing, we can see that we are setting those animations throughout the sequence. So attack, static, damage, we're setting those sequences there. So I want to say that's everything we need in order to do an attack now. So we have a couple of errors. Let's see, there is a typo with that. And all right, so quickly, gonna run over to the hooks folder. I forgot to add my export for my use battle sequence hook. Cool. So just refreshing just to get things at a fresh start here. Click start game, looking good. I'm going to click attack Megaman has chosen to attack. The animations happen. The health goes down. The announcer is doing what it's supposed to do. Now it's Samus's turn. Okay, so everything is going well for the attack. Let's implement magic and heal. I'm just going to close out of all my other stuff and head into my use battle sequence hook. And I'm going to create a new case for my switch called magic instead of attack. But I'm pretty sure I could actually just copy that entire sequence and then just change a few things here and there, right? So I'm going to copy everything above this break up until here. And I'm going to go to the bottom of this case, create a new case. So case magic. And then paste in that. So instead of damage equals attack, we're going to set this equal to magic. It takes the exact same props, the exact same object. And we already have attacker and receiver. What is this complaining about? Damage has already been declared. So the reason why it's doing that is because we need to put we want to block scope our switch, basically. So I'm going to put a curly braces here, and I'm going to do the same thing here. Excuse all these yellow lines for a moment. Boom. So now I'm block scoping my switch, but I also need to put in a default case. So just running back to the bottom really quick. Default break. So don't forget the colon. Okay, so I'm basically just block scoping it so that I can redefine variables and that sort of thing. Okay, so going down, damage is equal to magic. There's a couple things that we're going to change about this. Instead of saying attacker.name has chosen to attack, we're going to say has cast a spell. Instead of setting the player animation and the opponent animation to attack, we're going to set it to magic. Might as well copy that because we're going to need that throughout. So keeping this the same, that's the same, this is the same, this is the same. I think just to make this a little bit funner, instead of setting this same message for the announcer here, instead of saying felt that, let's do doesn't know what hit them. I think that would just be a little more interesting to change it up a little bit. Then this should remain the same, and everything else looks like it would remain exactly the same. Cool. So let's test the magic sequence out. I'm gonna refresh this. Okay, so I'm gonna click magic. So cast a spell, did the magic animation. Samus doesn't know what hit them. Now it's Samus's turn. Samus has cast a spell. Now I'm getting hit. Mega Man doesn't know what hit them. Looks good. Okay, really, really good. The only thing left is the heal case. So in the case of heal, things are gonna be a little different for heal. So I am actually going to write this from scratch. So let's just breeze through this really quick. So the first thing we want to do is calculate recovered instead of damage. And we're going to call heal. And we're going to only pass in receiver because we don't care about the attacker in this case. In fact, there is no attacker. The attacker and the receiver are the same. In fact, we could call receiver attacker. That's really what we should be doing. Because as the attacker, you're calling heal on yourself. So you're both the attacker and the receiver. We're going to do an IIFE with an async keyword. And then we're going to set in sequence to true. So that part remains the same. And we want to set the announcer message. This time we are going to put attacker.name has chosen to heal. All right. At the bottom of this, I just want to put my break just to get that yellow line out of the way. It was kind of annoying me. All right. So after that, we're just going to wait 1 second. So 1000 milliseconds. And we're going to do our ternary to say if the turn is equal to 0, we want to set the player animation to magic. Otherwise, we will set the opponent animation to magic. Then here we will simply wait 1 second or 1000 milliseconds. And then we're going to reset the animation. So set it to static, basically. I'm going to copy this because I feel like it would be easier just to copy this and then change the values from magic to static here. And then instead of waiting a full second, I will just wait half a second. So 500 milliseconds. Now let's set the announcer message. Set announcer message. We are going to say attacker.name has recovered health. Then we're going to do a ternary. If it's the player's turn, we will set the player health. And the calculation we will use for the player health, again, we don't ever want to go above the max. In the same way with attack and magic that we don't want to go below 0 for the health, we also never want to go above max. So we're going to do the same kind of logic here, just a little bit different. If H plus recovered, the amount recovered, is greater than, or I'm sorry, less than or equal to the max health, so attacker.max health, then we want to go ahead and set that health equal to H plus recovered. Otherwise, we just simply want to set it to the attacker.max health. Then on the other end of this ternary statement, we want to do the exact same thing that we are doing here, but for the opponent health. Set opponent health, whoops, not animation. Set opponent health, what? And then I'm just pasting in that exact same logic. This is what it looks like. Turn is 0, we're doing it for the player. Turn is 1, we're doing it for the opponent. Very simple. And then we're going to wait 2,500 milliseconds. Then after that, we're going to set the announcer message equal to now it's, and then we will pass in the receiver dot name turn exclamation point. Let's put an apostrophe S there. And I think I forgot an apostrophe S on these ones as well. Yep. Let me put an apostrophe S here and apostrophe S here. I just kind of forgot that. All right. And then after we set the announcer message, let's wait 1,500 milliseconds. And then finally, you know what we do. We set the turn equal to the other person's turn and set in sequence. Whoa. Set in sequence to false. Now, I'm pretty sure that's it. I think that we have a fully functional sequencing situation. Let's try it. Refreshing. Start game. Let's try it to attack. Let's attack. Attack animation works. Everything's looking good. Samus's turn. Samus attacks. Okay, great. Now I'm going to try to heal. Okay, so heal. I've chosen to heal. Little animation for healing. I recovered health. Now it's Samus's turn. Let's see what they do. Attack. Now all I have to do is try magic. Just make sure the magic works. Magic. Cast a spell. Quick animation. Boom. Samus's turn. Cast a spell as well. Awesome. It is working good. Okay, so the only thing remaining now is to test the end of the game. So to determine who has won the game. So let's make this pretty simple. Let's go to the battle component. We're not going to need this hook anymore. We're done with that. Let's go to the battle component. And the battle component needs to accept a new prop called onGameEnd. Okay, so onGameEnd. Now I'm going to go back to my app component really quick. And we need to pass in an onGameEnd function here, onGameEnd. And we should probably set a function in here. Now this function should actually take a winner, and we should also set some state in here that for the winner, and I'll show you why we need that in a second. So go ahead and create a piece of state called winner, which will just be a string, or maybe it could be the full game player object. Either way, just create a piece of state, and let's not initialize it. Let's just leave it undefined for now, and let's set the winner equal to whatever the winner is that gets passed in here, and then we will also set the mode. Remember, the mode is what switches us between these different views. We'll set the mode to game over. All right. Okay, we should have that. So then once that is done, once we finish the logic in the battle component, it should switch to this view that says game over. So everything should disappear and we should just see the word game over. And then we'll add the end screen component as the very last step of this tutorial. So the calculation for determining whether or not the game is over is going to be pretty simple. Let's throw it into an effect here, and let's run the effect whenever player health, opponent health change, and if at any time player health is equal to 0 or opponent health is equal to 0, then we know that the game is over. And we're going to actually do asynchronous logic here, because we want to wait a second before we set it so that the user has time to register the fact that they've lost. So it doesn't just switch to the other screen instantaneously as soon as the game's over. Like, we want to wait a full second for the health to drain and everything. That makes sense? And for them to register the fact that they lost before it just goes to the end screen. It's just a better user experience. So await, wait 1,000 milliseconds, and then we will call onGameEnd. And we'll call onGameEnd conditionally because we need to pass in the winner. So if the player health is equal to 0, then we will pass in the player stats, actually the opponent stats, because the opponent would have won if the player's health is 0. So opponent stats, otherwise player stats. And this hook is complaining because we need to pass in the onGameEnd to the dependency array. Okay, so let's lower. I'm gonna actually go to characters and I'm gonna lower the health, the max health here to like something ridiculously small, like 27 and 28, so that this will end very quickly so that I can test this very easily. So I'm gonna attack, it should be like a one-hit kill, boom, dead. Now you can see that it says game over. So the only thing left is to create that end screen component. I've went in and I've created my end menu, where is it? End menu folder with the end menu component and index.js where I'm exporting it. Actually, almost forgot to do that. Let me do that now. Okay, and then I have a CSS file here. And then I went into my components level index file and exported it there. So let's go ahead and paste in our CSS. So inside of the CSS file for that component, I'm just pasting in the CSS. Again, just go to the GitHub link or copy it manually if you prefer to do that. Honestly, if you're still kind of familiarizing yourself with CSS, I recommend just doing it manually so that you can see what each line is doing on your screen as you do it. But if you care only about the React and JavaScript side of things, just paste it in. It's really not a big deal. So what is going to go into this end menu? Well, it's going to look exactly like the start menu, but instead of saying start game, it's going to say play again. And we're also going to display the winner's name at the top. We have this div. Let's add an H1 at the top. And then in here, let's pass in the winner's name. But for that, we're going to need a prop called winner. And let's also pass in an on start click so that when we press the on play, it'll reset the mode back to battle. Yes, winner.name is what we want to go here. And we just want to say has won, exclamation point. Easy enough. And then below this, we just want a button, if I can type. Oh my word. There we go. This button should say play again. The on click for it is going to be on start click. And we just want to add a class name of styles.startButton. And that is it for the end menu. Then we got to go back into the the app component. And then inside of the app component, instead of rendering game over, let's render our end menu component and pass in the two props. So the winner is going to be winner, and the on start click is going to be a function that sets the mode equal to battle, but we also want to make sure we reset the winner. So coming over here, so set mode to battle, but let's also set the winner to undefined. Whoa, that's not what I want. Undefined, there we go. Okay, so I think we have a fully finished game. I still have it on really easy, so I can actually come in here, do a one-hit attack and make sure we see the screen. So it should say Megaman has won. Megaman has won, play again, should now reinitialize the game. I'm going to heal so that Samus can win this time, just to make sure that it says Samus has won if Samus wins. Hopefully they don't heal. That would be kind of funny. Cast a spell, great. Dead. And Samus has won. Excellent. So we have fully completed this. I'm going to just make sure I go back in and readjust the characters file to be 188 and 177 instead of 27 and 28. We have a very complete game. All right, well, hope you all enjoyed that video. If you stuck around this long, good job. Hope you learned a lot, and I hope it was fun. And I will see you all in the next video.